Class. Hi Pavan. Hi Rodrigo. Hi Samuel. Hi Ashraf. Hi Dr. Krishna. In this class, we have a question and answer session for our members. We do this every couple of weeks so that we have lots of time for me to reflect on your inquiries and hopefully clarify any confusion that you may have about the IELTS and maybe highlight some points that will help you to get better scores. To become a member of our YouTube channel, just click the join button beside the subscribe button. Everybody's welcome to watch. And in about 90 minutes, we will have another reading session from our latest reading passages. All right, everyone. This class is brought to you by aehelp.com. For academic IELTS help, check us out there. Lots of your questions can be answered through our interactive courses, forums, blogs. For general IELTS, check us out at gieltshelp.com. That's generalieltshelp.com. And there's lots and lots of practice exams and so on there for you. I'll show you what those sites look like super quick here. This is the academic at aehelp.com with the blue background. Click that big red button to join the premium package or try it for free. Click the try demo button under the big red button. Same thing here with the general IELTS web portal. Layout is very, very similar to the academic, except with a green color scheme. Click that big red button to join, or again, the green button to try it for free. If you have any questions, just send me an email, adrian@aehelp.com. Also get our apps, Academic IELTS Help, link it to your aehelp.com account, or General IELTS Help, link it to your gieltshelp.com account. Students, today is the last day for this week of live classes, and of course I will have another week full of classes for you starting from Wednesday. Okay? So let's get into today's question and answer session. I'll try to answer as many of your inquiries as possible. It's a first come, first served basis, and of course I'll select based on some questions that may be connected as well. And I can see that there are lots of members with some questions already. Very curious about some of these points here. So let's get into it. Okay. So I think the first question today, it comes from Hina Arshad. Hina says, I feel in speaking part 3, I start to repeat myself. How can I overcome such a situation? Okay. Yeah, that frequently happens, Hina. It's a good question. So Hina's question is, how can I avoid Yeah, it's a really good one, Hina. A lot of people do that, and definitely repeating yourself in the speaking, especially part 2 and part 3, that's where it's very common. That does lower your score because you're not showing more lexical resource, you're not showing more grammar when you're repeating yourself, and you're using up your valuable time. So Hina's asking, how can I avoid repetition in my speaking? And I'm going to say part 2 as well, Hina, because that's common as well. In part 3. Okay. And that's really important, Hina. It is important to avoid repetition. Okay. Most importantly, Hina, so you really want to keep in mind and practice this skill here. So use the question in your answer. Okay, I'm going to show you this in a second, what I mean, Hina. Okay, and always approach the question as answer plus explanation plus smooth example. Okay, so let's put up an example part 3 question for this, okay? And, oh yeah, and I wanted to add one more here. And use connectives to motivate you for giving more details. and additional information. Okay. So, of course, you have to think quickly on your feet, as they say, to come up with more ideas. But one way to push yourself to do that is with connective. So let's say that the question is something like a typical Part 3 question here. What are some ways that governments can encourage their citizens to live healthier lives? Okay, all right. So let's take this example question here, Hina. Everybody, you can give me an answer. I'll come back to your questions, don't worry, but this is an important one that Hina's asking, so I'm going to take a minute on this, okay? It is one of the most common ones here, okay? So what are some ways that governments can encourage their citizens to live healthier lives? Give me an answer for this, students, and follow this technique of using the question, giving an answer, using a connective, giving an explanation, and then giving an example. Okay? So here we go. What are some ways? Now, if you can't paraphrase, just use verbatim. There are several ways that governments, if you can paraphrase, then paraphrase. There are several approaches for national authorities to motivate. So this depends on your English level and on your lexical resource. The better it is, the more you can paraphrase. But so far, all I'm doing here is just simply using the question in my answer to start me off. Why? Because this guarantees that I'm starting with an answer, not with an explanation, not with an example, but with an answer. Okay? So there are several approaches for national authorities to motivate their public to live healthier lives. Such as building recreation facilities. Okay, if you don't know recreation facilities, you can say sports centers, athletic centers. Okay, there's different ways, so the words don't have to be. So here it's still the answer. Okay, so such as building recreation facilities and providing nutritious produce. Okay, so visualize, how do people live healthy lives? Of course, by exercise and by diet. So the government can provide such services, better recreation facilities or sports facilities, and nutritious produce. So far, this is just an answer. Okay, now this is where a lot of students might start repeating themselves. When governments build sports facilities, people are healthier. So a lot of students here will do something like, when governments provide sports centers, people become healthier. Okay, but this is not good. Okay, so this is what you want to avoid. This would be your repetition. So this is not good. Okay? It's not good communication because all you're doing there is just repeating what you already said in a different way. So instead, you want to give details. And the key to doing that is giving a reason that's more clear. So you want to use a connective that shows cause and effect, Hina. So really focus on these cause and effect types of connectives. Because. Okay. So as soon as you use the word because or since or as a result or therefore or so, you push yourself to think more deeply about the idea of building recreation centers and providing nutritious produce. Okay? So why do recreation centers and nutritious produce make people healthier? Okay? Why? So let's have a little dialogue here, members. I know that you have a lot of your own questions, but let's engage each other's questions. I'll get to the other ones as well. So why? Why do sports centers lead to healthier people? Why does nutritious diet? So you have to practice this at home. You have to practice explaining reasoning or logic. Okay? Keep it simple, baby steps. Think about the lessons that your grade 6, 7, grade 8 teachers taught you as younger children. That's a lot of the information that you need to use in this case to sound very intelligent and very knowledgeable. Okay? So, while you're thinking about that, I'll answer it. So, because when people move around, they increase their cardiovascular health and burn calories. Also, when they eat lots of fruits and vegetables, they get more vitamins into their system. Okay, so moving into that, right? So Hina, they improve healthy lifestyle is still just repetition. So that's just it, right? You don't want to repeat that. You've already said that, right? Why does a recreation center help people? Because when we move around, we burn calories. We increase our muscle mass. We improve our breathing. We improve our cardiovascular health, right? So you have to think about these kinds of details, right? So, and then your smooth example, okay? So the Canadian government builds a free recreation center in every urban neighborhood, and in this way decreases the rate of cardiovascular disease in the country by 20% compared with other developed nations. Okay? So immediately, right? Content, visible content. All right? So this is my answer here, and this is how you build fluency and avoid repetition, but this takes practice, Hina. So what are some ways that governments, and again, students repeat, so when I'm showing you this, I'm not just reading for you, but repeat me. What are some ways that governments can encourage their citizens to live healthier lives? There are several approaches for national authorities to motivate their public to live healthier lives, such as building recreation facilities and providing nutritious produce. Because when people move around, they increase their cardiovascular health, burn calories. Also, when they eat lots of fruits and vegetables, they get more vitamins into their system. The Government of Canada builds free recreation centers in every urban neighborhood, and in this way decreases the rate of cardiovascular disease in the country by 20% compared with other developed countries or nations. Okay? Boom, band 9, right? Now, that takes practice, but the logic is what you have to follow, the logic, right? And it's these key words, because, that force you. But when you use because, go into more detail. Think about what you said and why you said it. Okay? All right, so that's a good question, Hina, but that's what you got to do. Don't repeat yourself. So don't just keep paraphrasing the same idea over and over. Okay? All right, we'll practice more of that when we do some speaking sessions. So Natalie Nikiforova, don't worry about it. You can go back and practice later this lesson when it's up on the channel. Okay, so let's go to some other questions. That was a good one, Hina. That is definitely one of the most common challenges for Band 6, Band 7 students in order to get into the Band 8, 8.59 category. Okay, all right. Samuel Sadir is asking, if I stammer in between my speaking tests, would they reduce a band even if I spoke well at times when I'm not stammering? Yeah, okay, so Samuel is asking, do I lose marks for stammering? Yes, if you do not indicate a speech impediment on your application. Okay, so if you have a stuttering or a stammering issue, even in your own language, if it's a part of the way that you speak, it's called a speech impediment. You have to indicate that on your exam, and they, I believe, do ask for a professional note that says that you do, and in that case, they don't count it. Okay, so keep in mind, students, that there is a place on the Ielts exam registration or application where you can indicate any type of learning or speech disability, such as stuttering, I believe it's spelled like that, stuttering, stammering, or dyslexia. Okay. If you have such a condition, you must make sure to indicate it and get a note from a professional, like a speech therapist. Okay. And then in that way, they will not pay attention to that. In some cases, they can give you extra time in the reading section and so on. So they do have some special kinds of situations available to you if you have that. But be careful if you don't have a speech impediment. Don't fake it, okay? Because if they catch you for that, that's going to be a disaster. So only if you have some kind of an actual speech impediment, then yeah. But if you don't label it, or if you don't indicate that on your application, then it will count against you. Okay. Otherwise, no. Okay. So make sure you pay attention for that. I hope that kind of makes it clear, Samuel. Okay. If you're stammering, Samuel, or using some awkward phrasing because you haven't prepared, that's a different story, right? Then, of course, that counts against you. Okay. All right. So Pavan is asking, how do I endorse using active voices when I use Grammarly? It says passive voice misuse. Okay, in your writing, right, Pavan? All right. So Pavan is asking, basically, when should I use active versus passive voice? Grammarly keeps telling me passive voice misuse. Okay, Pavan, I'll answer this quickly, but it's grammar. Okay, so a couple of points on active and grammar, or active and passive voice. Okay, so here we go. General Ielts, task 1. Ielts, task 1. And task 2. Use the active voice. Okay. Academic task 1, you may need to use the passive voice. Okay. Academic task 2, you should use the active voice. Okay. The active voice, just so everybody's clear on passive and active voice, okay? And in speaking, you should use active most of the time as well. So active voice means my mother drives me to school. Okay. Passive voice is, can anybody give me the passive voice so I'm not just throwing fish at you, but you're doing some fishing of your own here? So here is, here's the active voice. My mother drives me to school. Change this sentence into a passive voice for me. Okay. Samuel, you're using present perfect in there as well. Don't put the present perfect in there. Just keep it simple like this. Yeah, Dr. Krishna, very good. So Dr. Krishna says, I am driven to school by my mother. Okay. So good. So that's the passive voice. Okay. So this is the active, okay? Now, my mother here is what's called the agent of the action. Another way you'll hear it is the doer of the action, okay? Why? Because my mother does the driving, okay? So subject, agent, verb, and then comes the object, me to school, right? So this is the agent of the action. Here, I become the subject, but I'm not the agent, okay? So not agent of the action. That's how you'll read it in grammar school, agent of the action. So not the agent of the action. Okay, so I am driven to school by my mother. So notice how here I put by my mother into brackets. And the reason for that is you don't actually have to mention the agent of the action in a passive sentence. So here we have the subject, we have the verb, and then we have the object. It's a full sentence already. If we know the agent of the action, we can include it. However, keep this in mind, students. Usually, when we know the agent of the action, so we know the doer of the action, we want to use the active voice. Okay? So, a good question here, Pavan, is when do we use the passive voice, or why do we use it, right? That's what I keep telling students, is make sure that you know the reason for certain types of grammar. Okay? So, when do we use the passive voice? Does anybody know that? When is it a good idea to use the passive voice? So Rajveer says, shouldn't we use passive voice to emphasize the action when the agent is not important? That's kind of it, Rajveer. That's one okay answer to my question. Anybody else? When is it a good idea to use passive voice in your speaking or your writing? Ashraf says maybe an indirect speech. Sometimes, but sometimes not, Ashraf. So sometimes the active voice is better in indirect speech as well. So it's not necessarily true. Direct or indirect speech, we might want to choose the active voice. Passive. So Natalie says maybe in scientific research. Nope. Natalie, in fact, in science, we really want to use the active voice because we want to know who's doing the science. Okay. So I'll give you the answer, and it should clear this up a little bit. So the best situations to use the passive voice are, firstly, okay, when we do not know the agent of the action. Okay, so there are situations where we don't know the agent of the action. And in task 1 writing in the academic, when you have a graph or a chart, sometimes we don't know the agent of the action. So we don't know who's doing the action. And that's why you might end up using the passive voice. Okay, so the pyramids had been built 4,000 years ago. Now I'm going a little science fiction on you here, but here, let's imagine for a second that it wasn't the Egyptians who built the pyramids. We don't know if it was the Egyptians. We don't know if it was aliens. We don't know if it was some reptilian species that no longer exists. I'm going all science fiction on you here. So instead of telling you that I don't know who built the pyramids, all I want to tell you is that they were built 4,000 years ago because I don't know the agent of the action, so I don't know who did this. I would say the pyramids had been built 4,000 years ago. Now this is, of course, using the past perfect. So this is a past perfect passive. That's why it's had been built, okay? But again, the pyramids being built by someone, but we don't know the agent of the action, okay? So when you don't know who came up with that, okay? For example, another one, the airplane was invented in the early, or let's say in the late 1800s, okay? So, for example, if I can't think of who invented the airplane, then I will use the passive. The airplane was invented in the late 1800s, okay? But if I know who invented the airplane, okay, then I would say the Wright brothers invented the airplane in the late 1800s, okay? Here's an interesting rule of thumb, students, okay? And then I'll come back here. So, in academic, this is very important. In academic and business writing, as well as speaking, so I should say communication, mostly professionals want to hear and read the active voice because they want to know who is responsible. Okay? So it's strongly advised by professors and professionals to avoid the passive and use the active voice because we always want to know who's the doer of the action, okay? So in my company, if somebody says, the project wasn't finished on time, so somebody sends me an email like this or writes a sentence to me like this, then I will write back who is responsible for the project being late. Okay? Who do I fire? Okay? So I appreciate it much more when, let's say, one of my workers, I'm just going to make up a name here. I don't want to point fingers at anyone. So Greg didn't finish the project on time. So if I get this kind of message or communication, then I'm going to answer, okay, what is the reason for this, and when will it be done? Does that make sense, students, what I'm kind of teaching you here? Okay, so manipulating the agent of the action is really a masterful skill in professional and academic writing. And Carolina says, ha ha ha. I'm glad you're enjoying that, Carolina, but it's true, okay? So pushing and showing responsibility is really important. So the times when we use the passive voice are when we do not know the agent of the action, or when we do not want to attribute responsibility of the action to the agent. Okay, so when we purposefully don't want to give that action to the agent in our communication, all right? So those are the times when we use the passive voice, okay? This one people will also say when the action is more important than, well, actually, I should probably write that as a third one. Could be confusing. So when the action is more important than the agent. For example, the city of Atlantis had been destroyed. Okay, so the city of Atlantis had been destroyed. What's important here is the destruction itself, not necessarily the doer of the action. Okay, so those are the situations for that. Where it becomes more tricky, students, of who's the doer of the action. So one last kind of point on this. I know you have lots of questions, but it's be careful with passive active. Active voice, where it's tricky to know the agent of the action. The most common example for this one in the English language is borrow and lend. This is the one that's often confused by students. Okay, so the item was borrowed by the neighbor. Okay. So here, the agent of the action is the neighbor. The neighbor is doing the borrowing. Okay. So this is a passive sentence. So this is a tricky one with borrow and lend. Oftentimes, students will confuse this. So Pavan, in Grammarly, if you make a mistake with borrow and lend, based on who's the doer of the action, that's one typical situation where Grammarly might say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. You've got the doer of the action confused, okay? So Grammarly's pretty good at figuring that out, all right? Okay, cool. So lots there about passive and active. Do be familiar with both. It's definitely important to know how to use them effectively, passive and active voices, okay? All right, let's see, some more questions. Okay, Dr. Krishna says, can you please briefly tell us about Ielts indicator format? Is it exactly like CBT, and after that, is it required to repeat? Yeah, Dr. Krishna, there's a video on the channel about this. So Dr. Krishna is asking, what is the format of the Ielts indicator? Yes, okay, it is very synonymous with the computer-based IELTS. Write that out. Computer-based IELTS exam. Now, one big difference, Dr. Krishna, is the computer-based IELTS exam. You still do your speaking interview face-to-face, but in the IELTS indicator, you actually do that online as well. So the speaking is different. The CBI, let's call it, computer-based IELTS, is face-to-face. And the indicator is online. Now remember, the indicator is only for the academic IELTS. So of course it's not synonymous with the computer-based general IELTS exam, because there is no computer-based general IELTS exam available like the indicator. So the indicator is just for the academic. Okay, keep that in mind. All right. And then the second half of your question, Dr. Krishna, is do you have to redo the formal IELTS after? Yes or no. So you may need to redo the official academic IELTS, especially if your scores are very close to the cutoff, like 6.5. Okay. However, if you get band 7.5 or more on each section of the indicator, it is unlikely that you will have to redo the exam. Okay, that's obvious, right? So if you get a really good score, and it's obvious that you're not cheating, there's no problems for the professors to understand you, so it's obvious that there was no cheating. That's one of the points that they're really worried about with the indicator. No cheating, because you write good essays in school, and you understand lectures, and you communicate well with classmates. Okay, you will not be asked to do the exam. Okay, if they smell something fishy, like you got a band 8 on the IELTS indicator, but you're really struggling in your essays and talking to your classmates, yeah, they'll be like, okay, resit the IELTS. There's something not right there. Okay, so they'll pay attention to that. Happens all the time, students, where somebody does not complete the IELTS as they should, or maybe they got really lucky and they're not performing well in their school or university. And then the university basically says, hey, what's going on here? Something's not right. Can you please sit these exams again? Because we need to make sure that you're not going to fail or have a lot of problems, right? There's no point in failing university. So, okay, hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Again, Dr. Krishna, there's a video on the channel for that. Okay, Rajveer is asking, as part of task 2 planning in our classes, we maintain detailed information using critical thinking, and I think it's not possible in case of the real exam. Very good question, Rajveer. So Rajveer's, I'm going to change your question a little bit, Rajveer, but it's a good question. So Rajveer is saying, okay, how can we maintain the level of planning for part 2 that we do in class in the short time of the official exam? Yeah, that's a very valid point, Rajveer, and it's a good point. The answer is you practice lots before the exam, and during the exam, much of the planning happens in your mind, and you only jot down the key ideas. Okay, so yes, you're right, Rajveer. You would definitely not have time to write down all of that information that we write down in the planning and introductory paragraph phase of these live classes. But the reason I'm doing that, Rajveer, for everyone is to train that kind of thinking. So when I show you that what, why, how, and identifying the topic and the controlling idea, I go into a lot of detail and I very explicitly explain the information. Now, of course, if I were to sit in a real exam and I had 40 minutes to write the intro, the body one, body two, conclusion, then I wouldn't actually go through that information at such a granular level, but rather I would quickly spin that information in my mind and then just pull out the key points which I use for my thesis. Okay. So in this case, in this week, we had the higher taxes on junk food. So in this case, all of that information of what is higher taxes on junk food, repricing tax, kind of like tobacco, alcohol, all of that is going on inside my head. Why would the government do this? Okay, so the only pieces of information that I would write down is discourage consumption, fund medical costs, save the environment, as Abhishek said, right? And then I would contemplate whether or not I want to include all three of these points or just two of these points as well, okay? And then a couple of other ideas, of course, that I might jot down for the background would be like diabetes or type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, okay? So that's all that I would have really for my notes. So I wouldn't detailed go through what, why, how on the paper. Most of that would all just happen very quickly in my mind. And it shouldn't take you more than 3, maximum 4 minutes. If you think about it, Rajveer, 3 or 4 minutes, if you count the seconds, right? 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, all the way to 21,000, because that's 5 minutes, or 16, 1,000. Then, or was it? Anyway, so 18, 1,000. So, yeah, I'm off. But anyway, so you get it. It's a lot of time. The point here, it's a lot of time to spin those thoughts. As long as you're calm, you're not panicking, you will be able to come up with these kinds of key points, enough that you can have some very good points for your thesis statement, those direct thesis statement points. Okay. Yeah, so Pavan's saying just write short notes down. That's jot down. Yeah. Does that make sense, Rajveer? Yeah? So you're still doing all of that planning, but it's happening a lot faster in your head, and only the most essential points are coming to the paper. Okay? But when you're, of course, when you're practicing before your exam, that's why you write everything down, so that you can be much faster and more accurate. Okay, so that's the pre-training, right? Okay, just think about, Rajveer, a good example here is think about the 100-meter dash. So when people are running the 100-meter race in the Olympics, right? Think about all the training that they do before their race, and then the actual race is over in less than 10 seconds. So when it comes to the actual race, they do everything that they trained for in all of that time in 10 seconds, right? Or less than 10 seconds. So that's what happens with Ielts too. All of that training gets condensed into a much shorter frame of time. Okay. All right. Let's see. Rajveer, I'm going to skip a couple questions there because I see that you have more of them. Okay. Just want to get to some other students as well. Hassan saying, how can I make my brain adapt to handwriting? All of my practice is touch typing and my exam is on paper. In both methods, the methodology is same using the brain and hands. Yeah, Hassan, it's a valid point, valid question, okay? And it's not the same, okay? So Hassan is asking, how can I make my brain adapt to handwriting as opposed to touch typing? That's a tricky one, Hassan. If you're used to touch typing, you should do the computer-based exam. If you're used to handwriting more than touch typing, you should do the paper-based exam. It's a big difference, okay? So touch typing and typing by or handwriting is in fact quite different in the brain. So if you are used to the former, take the CBI exam. If you are more used to the latter, then the paper-based exam. Okay. All right. If you have to, Hassan, so if you have to do the handwriting, the paper-based exam, then you have to start handwriting. Okay. So if you have no choice, then practice the method that is used. That's what you can do. So yeah, it's definitely not a good idea, Hassan, to do all of your practice touch typing and then suddenly go into the exam and have to do paper-based writing. That could be like, you could easily lose marks just for that difference, no problem. So you have to practice, Hassan. There's no simple answer for that. There's no magical cure. When let's say you're right-handed and you're writing with your right hand, then your right hand, of course, is controlled mostly by your left hemisphere, by this side of your brain, okay? Because the information crosses over in the brain. So your right hand is controlled by more your left side of the brain, the motor skills. When you're touch typing, both sides of the brain are activated in the motor cortex and the motor areas. So touch typing with two hands is quite a different system in the brain. And of course, every piece of information and neuron that connects there is quite different than if you're using one hand. So be really careful, okay, with this. All right. It's a good question. It's actually a very valid question for exam preparation. All right, Samuel says, would they reduce the score if we make a couple of 2 or 3 spelling mistakes in listening or writing? Listening, yes. Writing, not so much. So Samuel is asking, do we lose marks for spelling mistakes? The answer here is in the reading and listening, yes. Yes. Okay. In the writing, not so much. Okay. In writing, you do not lose a lot of points for spelling mistakes if there are only a couple, unless the mistakes change the meanings of words. Okay? For example, you write black instead of plaque. Okay? Or would be spelled differently. Let me think of a common one here. right instead. You write right instead of right. You write right instead of right. Okay? Something like that. So it depends on your spelling mistake. If you're changing the meanings of words with your spelling mistakes, then definitely. Another one, I'm just trying to think of some that I've seen students do, like back instead of pack, for example. So that PB or the DB confusion, which can change the meanings of words, okay? All right, I see that you have more and more questions, students. We had a couple of big ones today, so I couldn't get to as many as I'd like. Yeah, so Natalie says whole instead of whole, or week instead of week, Regvir, exactly. So those kinds of mistakes, nice suggestions there, Regvir and Natalie. So when you're writing, definitely avoid these critical spelling mistakes that change the meanings of words. Natalie, that was good. Whole instead of whole. That was a good example. Okay. I ate the whole apple. Like if you write, I ate the whole apple, it's kind of like, what? Okay. So good question, students. If you feel I missed an important one, send it to me. You can also post your questions on our student forums on our websites. So for all of our viewers, check us out at aehelp.com for academic IELTS, glshelp.com for general. You'll find lots of answers to your questions. And in 30 minutes, roughly, I will host one more class for this week. That will be the reading section, and it's a new reading passage from our exams that we're developing currently. So even for our students that have been here for a while, you'll find that exciting because it'll be fresh material and it'll be new information. So hopefully you'll hang around for that coming up in 30 minutes. Much love to all of you. Bye, Pavan. You're welcome. You're welcome, Rajveer. You're welcome, Natalie. Good questions, everybody. Hina, that was a great question today. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye for now.